Hello, welcome to Soul Care in Real Life. We're hoping that this space will be a space where we can have thoughtful and grounded conversations about faith, about work, about spirituality, leaderships, our relationships, talk about doubt, talk about hope, and it's going to be hosted by me. I am Brian Sturtz, and I'm a board-certified chaplain. Spent time in the trauma room. I've spent time in pediatrics. I have explored and got master's degrees in theology. So I like to explore spiritual depth and faith and how those things kind of connect in our complex realities. So soul care in real life isn't about removing spirituality to somewhere over there, but instead exploring just what it is to have faith, to have spirituality in our hospital rooms, in our meeting places at work, around our kitchen tables, around those moments of private wrestling and doubt. And so that's what soul care in real life, the heart of it, is going to be about. It's just going to be about offering something that's not hurried, but instead something that is steady, a space to sort of breathe, to reflect, to connect with the things that matters most. And so we're going to be welcoming people from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different traditions, just to explore what does it mean to have faith and spirituality in real life? What does it look like to take care of our souls in the midst of the complex realities that we face? So welcome to Soul Care. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Soul Care, and thank you for joining us today. And today we have with us a guest, Mr. Lee Camp. Lee Camp is an award-winning professor. He's the author of several books. One of them, one of my favorites, is Scandalous Witness. That might be a book you want to pick up. He's also the host of the wonderful podcast called No Small Endeavor, where he explores what it means to live a good life. And so we're glad to have you with us today from Nashville as you dig out of the storm there. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with you, and grateful for the invitation.
Well, thank you very much for joining with us. You talk a lot on your podcast about what it means to live. When did that question become something for you that wasn't just like a question, but something that you wanted to explore further? Sitting around one day under the apple tree and the apple falls in your head and you thought to yourself, gee whiz, what does it mean to live a good life? Like, what does that look
Yeah.
like? What is that exploration for you? Like, how did that sort of progress in your life?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think that looking back, I mean, I did a PhD in Christian ethics. And so in some ways you could think of clearly by that point in my late 20s, I was very interested in that question. Because, at its best, ethics is this query, centuries-long series of questions about what does it mean to live a good life, and ask things like, what's it mean to be happy? Is happiness a legitimate pursuit? If so, what does it look like? It asks questions like, how does one live so that at the end of your life, you can look back on your life with gratitude as opposed to bitterness or resentment? These are like huge questions that most people care about. And it's not, ethics and the question about a good life is not, in my mind, at its best, a question about what the things you ought not do. And I think that I grew up in a highly legalistic church context, and there the emphasis was very often on what you ought not do, with a kind of finger wagging, shaming, And so somewhere along the way, I began to realize it's much more interesting to ask what we ought to do. And that's a much more interesting question, and it's a question that's worth carrying with you for the whole of your life. And somewhere, I don't know, a number of years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I came across Dag Hammarskjöld, who was one of the most famous Secretary Generals of the UN in the 20th century. And he has this beautiful little book called Markings. And he says in there, your responsibility is a two, T-O, with a dash. Your responsibility is a two. And then he says, you can never save yourself by a not to. And I love that because I think it captures so much about, it's a great framing for, I think, the questions that have driven me. That earlier in life, because of my faith context, I thought the primary thing was what not to do. And then in time, I realized, oh, that's not a very fruitful way to live one's life. It's a much more question. It's a much better question of saying what to do and what does a good life entail and mean. So it's been taking a lot of iterations, but it's certainly a driving question for a long time for me.
Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate that. I too grew up in a very sort of legalistic, very binary, here's the rules. And if you just follow the rules, everything will be just fine.
Yeah,
You step outside of that and look out. Your whole life could fall apart. Everything is ruined if you do these things. And so, yeah, I too have kind of discovered, especially working in the area of hospice, dealing with people. Typically, they can, some of them can be a bit more reflective, and they're asking a lot of questions about
yeah,
more along I avoided everything that was bad and
yeah,
framework. I think for
yeah.
myself, like some of those and life. No, you can live generously and kind.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So kind of along those lines, like so trying to live this good life in um, these things that we talk about or ways of living that we often maybe don't consider because we're too busy, maybe trying to, what has maybe, I don't know, shaped your soul of late, in these good things that we try to embody?
Hmm. Well, one that I'm thinking about again here of late is that I'm because of the winter storm you alluded to, and also because of my parents moving into assisted living and their house also getting hit really hard by the winter storm, and lots of pressures over the last month, and that are going to still be on us for another couple of months. And where some days it's just trying to get up and do the next right thing, and not really know how you can possibly get to everything that needs to be tended to. One of the practices that I've learned from a psychologist in Texas, University of Texas, Austin, I think is where she um, is Kristen Neff, and she's written a lot on self-compassion. She doesn't mean, hopefully, obviously, she doesn't mean by self-compassion indulgence, self-indulgence, but what she means is, you might think about it this way. It's like if you imagine one of your healthiest, most beloved friends who you can always trust to tell you the truth, but do it in a way that's gracious and kind and to be encouraging and wants the best for you. Self compassion at its best is like imagining that kind of friend and using that kind of voice and that kind of wisdom to talk to oneself. And in one very concrete, practical way, and I was just doing this again yesterday because I woke up, couldn't sleep for a large part of the night, and when I finally got out of bed, I did what she calls a self compassion letter, and you kind of write to yourself in that kind of voice of the friend who's speaking to you. And I've learned to do that in a way so that I always sign those letters by my middle name, which is Compton. And so it'll always, Dear Lee, and it will talk about all this stuff going on, give some helpful feedback, be encouraging, be kind, and then I'll sign it yours truly, Compton. And so it's a wacky exercise, but it's a wacky exercise that I keep finding is so helpful, and that's actually one of our most often commented on episodes with Kristen Neff on No Small Endeavor. And for people who are interested, they can go listen and get more details on that. But again, it's a very odd sounding exercise, but it's one that I have found very helpful.
Yeah, I really love that. I've never tried that myself, but I have tried uh, more in line of what some other like therapists and some other psychologists talked about, but which is just sort of this radical acceptance of yourself. Like this is who
Yeah.
I am, and really coming to just pay attention more to that. And
Yes. Yeah.
some ways, because for so long, for myself, again, growing up in the very sort of legalistic time, thing that I grew up in, you begin to wonder, like, can I trust anything? Do I even have a body that I can trust? Is this, you know, should I even have a desire? Is ice cream bad? Like, I kind of want like you begin to question all these things
Right.
instead of just sort of accepting, like, well, maybe this is a good gift
Yeah.
and I should treat
Yes.
it as such. And
Right.
it's okay. It's a good
Yeah.
gift, and it's a good thing. It's a healthy
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
to trust those things, and so I appreciate that. You mentioned, and I'm just kinda curious if you'd like to say more, you don't have to if you don't want to, but you mentioned putting your parents in assisted living, and when I was doing local church ministry for all these years, um, and now doing, I did not know how many people were in a nursing facility. I'm just be honest. I had no idea. I mean, I had visited nursing homes. I were aware, people go to these things. There's a lot of people. No, like there is a lot of people, and there's a lot of people that are having to go to work every day. They're trying to do a job, then they got to leave the job to go take care of mom and dad for a while, or whoever might be in the assisted living facility. They're juggling phone calls with, what was this appointment and what was this medication and we need to change this thing and somebody said something happened at the facility and oh, it's a lot. So what has that experience been like for you, if you wouldn't mind sharing one good about?
Yeah, I've certainly learned a lot. I fortunately am not an only child. I have two siblings, and I'm the middle child. And as often is the case, the firstborn takes a lot of the let's get things organized and get on with this. And that's what happened in our case. And my older brother was really really good about has been really really good about being proactive and attending to so many things. And but for all of us, it's been a significant demand on time, emotion, and so forth. And it's certainly, my parents are not in a nursing home. They're in more of it's an assisted living facility in which they have still a high degree of independent living. Um, but nursing care is available when and it's needed for a variety of levels of care. Um, but we frankly wanted our parents to move into something like that earlier because we felt like that was because of things I won't go into that was indicated and would be helpful to them. But they kept saying no, and then finally at one point, one of my parents said to my brother, "Okay, I need to be in a new place within 6 months," and so they made the decision, and which we were very thankful for, and they still could do so under their own steam, if you will. And so we're thankful for that. But it's hard for everybody. It's hard for them. They miss their home. They are continuing to grieve and missing their home. Um, but I think that it's one of those things. It's just well. Let me just back up and say this. I mean, I think that one of the things I've learned in watching both my parents and other people age is this notion that the mantra that's come to me is you grow old with your habits. And so to whatever degree I can have some impact upon my habits as a middle-aged man that will make me have a greater capacity for joy, a greater capacity for acceptance, a greater capacity for living at peace with myself and with others. If I want that as an elderly person, then I need to be working on that right now. Which goes to another recent book that I read recently from the Catholic writer Ronald Rolheiser, who's one of the best known Catholic writers, perhaps in the English speaking world, on spirituality. And he has this new book out on the last stage of life, and he tells this story about having to go visit. He takes a younger priest along, and they go visit an elderly man who's in his 90s and near the end of his life. And he's cheerful, and he's a gracious, generous human being. Even though he's, facing a lot of difficulties and challenges here at the end of his life. And the younger priest at the end of the visit says to the old man, "I'm so taken by your good spirit, and I'm so taken by the way you're facing this season of your life." And he said, "How can I be like you when I'm your age?" And the old man says to the young priest, "Start now." And I just think that's so simple, right? But it's so true. It's right. If that's what we want to be, then I start now. And so it's this invitation to one's own spiritual formation, so that, as Ronald Rolheiser put it, you can think of your death and those years leading up to your death as something that you can give away. That is, that we're all going to have to face dependence, and we're all going to have to face the diminishment of our capacities, and we're all going to have to face relying upon people that things we didn't ever want to rely on people for. And so we can see that as a thing we just grit our teeth about and make everybody miserable and ourselves miserable about. or we can try to find a way to let even our death and our dependence be something that we give away, in the sense of it can become a gift and it can become a grace, even though it's really, really hard. So I don't know. Those are some of the things that I'm thinking about through this season.
No, no, I really appreciate that. I don't think that I really ever gave much attention to that. And certainly going through a lot of even seminary work, there wasn't really a lot of attention given to hey, what to do about these people getting older or yourself getting older or how to pay attention to some of these issues
Yeah.
that kind of come up. You just really pay attention to it for some reason. I don't
Yeah.
know why that is, but I can tell you as I'm increasingly noticing more things about me as I'm getting older. The book of Ecclesiastes for me is just like that dude was totally right. Like there's gonna be it's all coming. Like there's going to
Yeah.
be a day this is going to go away. It is like vapor. It's faster than I thought it was going to be. But there's these beautiful things that are around you now, like pay
Right.
attention. And I think that's something I'm trying to do more,
Yeah.
pay attention to those things. And I really appreciate that because it's hard for a lot of families, what you're experiencing and parents shifting and they're getting older and they're getting older and
Yeah.
all of that. It is a shift and it's never an easy
Yeah.
thing because yeah, eventually we do become more dependent, and
Yeah.
that's very difficult in a culture that has told us.
Yeah. It does strike me, the one of my friends who's a professor in English literature told me some years ago, and then I've read quite a number of people who talk about this as well subsequently. But in the Middle Ages, there's a lot more attention to dying and these even death manuals, and so they would train themselves. That a large part of their life training was to train themselves so that they could know how to die well. And I think my sense of it is that we are so afraid of death and we so ignore death, the reality of death, that for a lot of people, even what we've just said in the last 2 or 3 minutes or 10 minutes feels horribly morbid and something they just simply do not want to talk about. But it's like, look, we all know every one of us is going to die. So why not spend more time seeing what we can learn from the fact of our dying, the fact that we can know that we're going to die, and then let that inform our formation so that we can potentially become freer, more joyous human beings if we really take that into account, instead of this kind of always holding it at arm's length, never taking seriously, having conversations about it. Um, and one of the most moving episodes I ever got to do with No Small Endeavor was a friend of mine was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he knew that he had about a year to live, statistically speaking. And I, kind of discerned on my own side, do I want to tape conversations with him over this, or ask him if he would tape conversations with me about his impending death over the next year? And actually, that's when I learned about the death manuals, because I asked this friend of mine at school. So I'm thinking about asking this other friend about this. What do you think about that? And he said, well, there were these death manuals. And so we talked about it. And I said, oh, well, I think I'm going to ask him. And so I asked him, and he said, yeah, I actually would really like to do that. And so on 3 or 4 different occasions, I sat with him for a long time, and we just talked about, how are you processing death coming at you? And what are you thinking about? What are you focusing on? What's working for you, in the sense of preparing yourself? What do you find frustrating about this process? And it was just a really beautiful experience for me, of someone who is coming up to the point of their death, being willing to share with me their inner landscape as they deal with that. And so again, I just think the more kind of conversations we can have like that, the more beneficial it is to all of us in our human maturation process.
Oh my gosh, yeah, yes to all of that. Yeah, I've really come to embrace the fact that yes, someday I'm gonna pass, and so how does that like the only moment that really matters is this moment right here.
Yeah.
I can't go. There's no such thing as a time machine. I can't go back. There's no such I can't go forward. Paying attention to this moment right here. And yeah, I wish, man, if you could go back in time and sort of train myself a lot better all those years ago, I think we would all live much better lives with sort of like the end in mind, you might say.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
this is coming. Oh, well, maybe it's not so important. What I'm so
Yeah.
There are other things. And on that note, just to shift gears for just a second, on that note of thinking about like the end in mind, you know, I must lament for just a minute my sort of Christian upbringing because I think that we've forgotten that. And I think we've forgotten that in some ways because I grew up around a whole lot of Christians that hammered home character matters. Character matters, integrity matters. You know, if you listen to the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing, you don't have the right kind of character, everything else is going to fall apart. Marriage, family, relationships, you name it, your job, everything's going to fall apart. It all hinges on, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. Like, have some integrity, right? I'm looking around right now, fellow brothers and sisters on that. I wonder if, in the Springfield Presbytery, a note, the death note for that, there's this line in there that's written, let this body die. And I'm wondering if in our present moment, I'm seeing a lot of Christian nationalism stuff. I'm seeing Christians just giving sway to things that I just never would have even thought of. Like what are we doing? I'm not sure. And I wonder if some of that doesn't play into that. Well, it's almost like we're afraid something's gonna die, that we're just gonna let it die. Or something like that. Or we're not thinking about the end in mind. And so now we're acting in certain ways, like these very nervous overreactions or something. I'm not really sure, but I almost want to lament it in some ways. It's a very scandalous witness where you talk a lot about what we call politics and church, and I think death and dying play into that. Learning what it is to let something just be, if we can appreciate it for really what it is, if we have the end in mind, so to speak, and especially when it comes to church, well then, or a gathering begin to look like. And
Hmm.
it doesn't seem like it's this. It seems like there would be some other ways of maybe forming our life. Like in your book, you talk about there's a difference between just believing and following, or accepting and following. And I think in part of following, it seemed to me like I'm accepting a certain kind of death to certain things, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know what you may or may
Yeah.
not think about any of that.
Well, I certainly think that there's a sort of entitlement that a lot of us might have in the wealthy Western world, where acceptance of death, certainly, but even far before death, acceptance of marginalization or minimization or any kind of challenge or hardship or difficulty, we maybe feel entitled not to have to bear those things. And so, um, when we have a kind of sense of entitlement, then we can very quickly fall prey to, I would say, a sort of idolatry of power that we start grasping after so that we can make sure we don't have to suffer. And, I mean, part of the irony of the current moment is that a lot of the demographics of people who are saying a lot about their own suffering, by and large, are not. I mean, here I'm just speaking from my perspective, okay? But when you have a lot of relatively wealthy white Christians who are all fearful of their supposed suffering, or their supposed marginalization, or their supposed being now perhaps in the minority down the road in a few decades. First of all, there's not a lot of that happening as far as any kind of serious suffering or persecution in the United States by those folks, of whom I'm one representative. But the irony is that out of that fear, then there is a lot of persecution and there is a lot of suffering being placed upon people who have already suffered a whole lot. And so the sort of rise, all sorts of signs of the rise of white supremacy and racist behavior and policies toward those who have suffered already historically a whole lot more than the people talking a lot about suffering. That's really deeply, deeply troubling. And the fact that it's somehow justified in the name of Christian faith, in my mind, is is not merely hypocrisy. It's more like a heresy, I think. And so, yeah, the things you're pointing to, it definitely, but to go back to your question, I think it definitely does relate to our capacity to accept or not the reality of death and the reality of that we're not in control, and that when you try to grab hold of the reins of power so that you can supposedly be in control, then you create a lot of pain for people in the wake of all of that.
Yeah, that's so true. I think my oldest son would have been about, maybe he was in the fifth or sixth grade, and they went to this Oklahoma
Mm,
field trip. Let's go, okay? And we go down to this. We're down here at this little history museum. We're walking around, and there's all these displays of all these historical things. And this person that's walking us around says, "And over here, this is the Tulsa race riot." And I was like, "Tulsa race riot?" It's like I've never even. So I had to go and that's the first time I learned about even that little snippet of it. And I grew up in Georgia, you know, where you would think, like, I remember there was a map one time growing up where all of America was in red, and then Georgia was outlined in blue. And the key to the map said red equal uh, people getting on with their lives, and blue equal people still fighting the Civil War. And that's kind of true with some ways. And you would think that that sort of history might just come out, but no, like it was almost kind of like a buried kind of a thing. And so that's another sort of discovery of just sort of learning a little bit about, like, there really has been a lot of suffering.
yeah,
There's probably a lot of that history that I am completely
yeah,
haven't been told.
right,
I didn't even know
yeah,
this happened, and it's horrible. It's sad.
yeah,
Uh, but to continue to act like that stuff didn't even happen is more.
yeah,
It seems to me like some of that goes down again, maybe because of the lack of acceptance of, but also maybe even like a compartmentalization. It's easy, I think, in the culture we've grown up in, where everything is very individualistic. There's work, there's church, there's or my spirituality or whatever, and there's all these little compartments, and it's hard for us, I
right.
think, sometimes to kind of bring some of those things together and kind of like bring. So, what do you think might be, if there's follower of Christ out there going to whatever church or something, like, how do they follow without becoming partisan? Maybe in this moment, what do you think?
I tend to think maybe one, minimizing or stopping social media consumption, um, because it certainly, I mean, there's all sorts of studies and indicators that it's fueling partisanship and sectarian hostility. And so that's one simple thing that we can do. I still use social media some for work, occasionally for personal stuff. But I've had to find ways to minimize it. And I think the more that I can get wrought up in that, the worse it is for my own mental health and emotional health, and also for my whatever sectarian tendencies I might have. And so that would be one of the most immediate things that comes to mind. And then a second practice I would suggest is always trying to find places where you can have conversations with people that will challenge your own viewpoints. And I don't say that in a way that I'm presuming you're then going to change your mind. You may or may not. But I think we make presumptions about judgments of people's character, based upon certain partisan political commitments they may have. And usually, once you try to know a person in real flesh and blood, it's much more complicated than I make it up in my head. And that they're not reducible to the worst imagining of my own sectarian partisan perspective. That we're all pretty complicated. We all contain multitudes, and so I can still strongly disagree, and even find policy and practice of another political party highly repugnant. Um, but it still may be more complicated as far as why any individual has done the things that they've done or thinks the thing that they think. And it may be, and it may be as simple as, I know David French, someone we were in, who's a New York Times columnist, and David one time told me that David's taken a lot of heat. David started out as a very conservative political commentator, and then starting with the rise of Donald Trump in 2016, he began being critical of Trump, and so he's taken a huge amount of heat for that. One time in an interview I did with David, he said, "Look, if you listened to the news sources that the people who oppose your views listen to all the time, you would believe what they believe too." And I have to keep telling myself that, right? It's like, depending upon the news source you listen to, you're going to think very, very differently about these things than the one who sees it differently. And if I just presume it's about malice and stupidity, then that's not opening up a possibility for some sort of rapprochement, between the parties. But if instead I keep reminding myself, well, if I listen to what they listen to every day, I would think what they think too. That it's a humbling of myself, right? And to be grateful that I'm able to listen to things that I think are more true, and and maybe even the things that I listen to are still screwed up in serious ways, and they probably are, right? Which then pushes me to say, okay, how do I need to continue to expand my own viewpoint? How do I need to get a broader perspective? How do I need to make sure I attend to the suffering of the marginalized and those who are being stomped on by power? So it can open up a lot of questions, and then it's an ongoing process of discernment as we go.
Feel that. Thank you. Thank you for that. I really feel that. Well, we're recording the session on Ash Wednesday, and usually some Christians for Lent sometimes give something up. Sometimes maybe they might take something on. But if you could tell America, "Hey, here's like one thing, could you just give this one thing up for Lent for like the next 40 days or so? Could we just all toss that one out the window? What might that be?"
There might be so many, but maybe one might just be hurry. And there's a lot of social science studies that have indicated that our morality and our attention to our neighbor and to those in need has a lot more to do with how hurried we are than it does to our character. And there was a famous study about this, the so-called Good Samaritan study that they did with seminarians, as I remember, where these seminarians were supposed to give a sermon on the Good Samaritan. And they had just been to a lecture by a professor, and then half of them were told, okay, you have to hurry across campus to such and so venue where you're going to give your sermon. And the other half were told, you're not in a hurry, you're free to take your time getting over there. And unbeknownst to the students, they had set up this person deeply, obviously in great need that they were going to meet on their path to give their sermon on the Good Samaritan. And the ones who were in a hurry just went right by him. And the ones who were not in a hurry stopped and helped him. And so, I think that's a good reminder of a lot of times we can talk a good game about the things that we say we care about and the things that we value. But maybe one of the things that we need is just to slow down and relax a bit and be attentive to the people and the concerns around us, as you said earlier in our conversation, to this moment that we find ourselves in. And a lot of grace might be found, I think, maybe in that approach to daily life.
Yeah, I thank you. Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah, I would totally agree with.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, I think that's a wonderful place just to kind of give people something they can just kind of thank you, Lee, and we will see everybody.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be with you, and blessings to you all there and the good work that you do.